Honor is not proven by the enemy you defeat, the old warrior proverb said, but by the choice you make when pride demands a price. The air above Virel Prime shimmered with heat as Captain Kilira Voss stepped from her dropship and onto the polished stone of the Dominion Council terrace, the surface warm beneath the metal plates of her war boots. 2 moons hung pale in the violet sky, their light reflecting off the towering silver banners that lined the Hall of Judgment. Her armor still carried the faint scent of scorched plasma from the border campaign, a sharp metallic smell that clung to the joints of her exosuit like a memory that refused to fade. Kilira moved with the calm precision of someone who had survived more battles than most warriors ever saw in a lifetime, each step measured, each breath steady, the quiet hum of her armor's power core vibrating softly against her ribs. A line of council elders watched from the far end of the terrace, their ceremonial cloaks flowing slowly in the warm planetary wind. None of them greeted her. That alone told her the victory she had just delivered to the Dominion was not the reason she had been summoned. The central dais glowed as the council's holographic seal activated, projecting ancient symbols of rank and lineage into the air between them. Captain Kilira Voss, the eldest councillor announced, his voice echoing across the marble courtyard, calm but heavy with expectation. Your service record is exceptional. Kilira lowered her head slightly, the formal gesture of respect drilled into every warrior since childhood, yet she felt the tension beneath the words before the accusation even arrived. The councillor raised a slender hand and the glowing sigils shifted, revealing her combat statistics, campaign routes, and command history floating in pale blue light above the platform. You have won 17 engagements, he continued. You command the loyalty of 3 fleets. Your tactics are studied in our academies. The symbols flickered once more, then collapsed into a single red glyph hovering above her name. And yet, he said quietly, you remain unbonded. A faint murmur spread through the council chamber. Kilira kept her posture still, but the muscles in her jaw tightened. Every warrior of rank within the Dominion was expected to form a life bond with a compatible partner before reaching command level, an ancient tradition said. To balance the instincts of war with the responsibility of leadership. Most warriors accepted the custom without question. Kilira had ignored it. The councillor's voice hardened slightly. By the law of the Virel Dominion, a captain who refuses the bond is considered incomplete in instinct and judgment. Such a warrior cannot command indefinitely. The holographic glyph shifted again, now displaying a countdown symbol slowly pulsing in the air. You are granted 30 cycles, the councillor declared. Within that time, you will claim a bond partner and fulfill the rite required of your rank. Kilira finally lifted her eyes to meet the council's gaze. And if I refuse? She asked. The wind stirred the long silver banners behind them, the fabric whispering like distant static. The councillor did not hesitate. Then your command will be revoked, and your rank returned to the warrior caste. For a moment the terrace was silent except for the low whine of Kilira's armor stabilizers. A warrior who lost rank rarely regained it. Everything she had built, every victory, every ship under her command, could disappear because of a tradition older than the Dominion itself. The councillor spoke one final time, his voice calm and final. Choose wisely, Captain Voss. Honor must be balanced, or it breaks the one who carries it. The council chamber emptied slowly after the judgment, leaving only the whisper of wind across the polished terrace and the distant glow of the 2 moons drifting above the horizon. Captain Kilira Voss remained standing where she had been dismissed, her armor still humming softly as its internal systems cooled after the long campaign. 30 cycles. The number repeated quietly in her mind like the ticking of a distant machine. In the Virel Dominion that was not much time at all. Warriors often spent years selecting a proper bond partner, studying compatibility, lineage, instinct, and honor. The council had given her barely a month. Kilira turned at last and walked toward the edge of the terrace where her command cruiser waited in orbit above the city. Far below, the capital of Virel Prime stretched across the desert basin in layers of luminous towers and elevated transit lines that glowed faintly turquoise against the darkening sky. The air smelled of warm stone and electrical energy from the planetary shield generators. Normally the sight filled her with quiet pride. Tonight it only reminded her of what she could lose. A soft mechanical tone sounded inside her helmet as her cruiser established a direct communication link. The calm voice of the ship artificial intelligence spoke into her ear. Captain Voss, Command Cruiser Stormbreaker reports all systems operational. Orbital position maintained at 22,000 miles above the capital. Awaiting further instruction. Kilira paused before responding. Prepare the ship for departure, she said. Destination, Outer Trade Corridor Theta 7. The artificial intelligence processed the command for a moment before replying. Acknowledged. Estimated arrival in 3 hours at standard acceleration. Kilira removed her helmet and let the warm wind touch her face for the first time since landing. The skin of her species carried a faint iridescent blue tone that shimmered slightly beneath the moonlight, a trait that often unsettled off-world travelers who were not used to the appearance of virile warriors. Her long silver hair shifted gently in the breeze as she studied the stars appearing above the city skyline. Somewhere out there she was expected to find a bond partner strong enough to satisfy the council. Someone who could stand beside a Dominion captain without weakening her command. Most warriors chose partners from within the clans. That path was no longer simple for Kilira. Too many rivals waited for her to fail. The Stormbreaker cruiser descended through the upper atmosphere soon after, its silver hull reflecting the city lights as it lifted her away from the council terrace and back into the silence of orbit. Inside the command deck, Kilira settled into the central chair while the navigation console projected a rotating star map above the floor. Hundreds of shipping routes crossed the outer territories where merchants, prospectors, and independent travelers moved quietly between systems beyond the strict authority of the Dominion. It was a place where strangers met and questions were rarely asked. Course plotted, the artificial intelligence announced. Trade Corridor Theta 7 contains 34 active vessels. Species origin, mixed. Kilira studied the glowing icons drifting slowly across the map. One signal caught her attention immediately. A small cargo transport moving alone at the far edge of the corridor. Human registry. She had heard stories about the species from Earth. Resourceful. Stubborn. Often underestimated. The ship appeared damaged according to its weak power signature, drifting slowly as if its engines were struggling to maintain speed. Kilira leaned forward slightly, curiosity flickering through her normally disciplined thoughts. Bring us closer, she said. I want a visual scan. The image of the drifting cargo vessel expanded across the forward display, its hull marked with burned scars and patched panels that told the story of long travel through difficult space. A faint life sign registered inside the ship. Only one. Kilira watched the signal pulse on the display and felt an unexpected sense that the stars themselves had just shifted slightly around her path. 30 cycles to find a bond partner. And the first ship she encountered carried a lone human drifting in the darkness of the outer frontier. The Stormbreaker cruiser drifted silently beside the damaged cargo transport while distant stars burned like cold lanterns across the black expanse of space, and for several seconds Captain Kilira Voss simply watched the vessel on the forward display without speaking as the ship's scanners traced every scar along its battered hull. The cargo ship was small by Dominion standards, barely 200 feet long from bow to engine assembly, its metal plating patched in uneven sections that reflected faint starlight like dull silver scales. One engine pod flickered with unstable power, the glow sputtering weakly as if the ship had been traveling far longer than it should have without proper repair. The Stormbreaker artificial intelligence spoke calmly through the command deck speakers. Life support detected. Oxygen levels stable but declining. Single occupant confirmed. Species classification, human. Kilira leaned forward slightly in the command chair, her silver hair shifting across the shoulder plates of her armor as she studied the rotating scan data hovering above the console. Humans were still uncommon travelers this far from Earth-controlled space, especially alone in a damaged freighter drifting along the trade corridor. The situation raised questions. Yet something about the steady pulse of the life sign held her attention. Open a communication channel, she ordered quietly. The artificial intelligence responded after a brief pause. Attempting contact. Static filled the bridge speakers for several seconds before a faint human voice finally pushed through the interference. This is cargo transport Horizon Drift. If anyone can hear this, my engine core overheated about 6 hours ago. I am running on emergency power and hoping someone out here believes in good timing. The voice carried a tired calm rather than panic, the tone of someone who had already accepted that space did not always offer second chances. Kilira studied the waveform displayed on the console. The human sounded composed despite the situation. That alone was unusual. She activated the forward transmitter. Cargo vessel Horizon Drift, this is Captain Kilira Voss of the Dominion cruiser Stormbreaker. Your ship is within my docking perimeter. State your condition. A short silence followed before the human voice returned, now slightly clearer as the transmission signal stabilized. Well, Captain, that is the best news I have heard all day. Name is Daniel Carter. I was hauling mechanical parts toward the outer colonies when my engine cooling system decided it had other plans. I have enough air for maybe another day if the backup recycler keeps working. Kilira glanced again at the scan results. The damage was not catastrophic, but the ship would not reach the next station alone. You are fortunate, she replied. My cruiser can stabilize your vessel. The human chuckled softly through the speaker, the sound surprisingly relaxed for someone drifting thousands of miles from the nearest port. Fortunate sounds about right. Out here luck is usually the difference between a long trip and a very short one. Kilira considered him for a moment before speaking again. Something about the steady rhythm of his voice felt different from the cautious diplomats and rigid officers she usually encountered. There was no fear in it. Only patience. Prepare for docking, she said. My crew will assist with repairs. The artificial intelligence automatically extended the cruiser docking clamps toward the cargo ship, magnetic guides slowly drawing the damaged vessel closer until both hulls aligned with a quiet metallic click that echoed through the Stormbreaker structure. Inside the observation window Kilira could see the faint glow of lights inside the human ship, moving shadows crossing the small corridor near the airlock. Somewhere inside that vessel stood the lone traveler whose life sign had caught her attention among 34 ships across the corridor. 30 cycles remained before the Dominion Council expected her to present a bond partner. Kilira had not intended to search among strangers beyond the frontier. Yet as the docking alarms faded and the airlock pressure stabilized, she found herself standing from the command chair and walking toward the access corridor. Sometimes the stars shifted a warrior path without warning. And sometimes the smallest ship in the darkest part of space carried the beginning of a story no council could predict. The docking corridor of the Stormbreaker cruiser carried the faint scent of ionized metal and recycled air as Captain Kilira Voss approached the sealed airlock that now connected her warship to the drifting cargo vessel. White status lights glowed along the walls while the internal pressure regulators released a quiet mechanical hiss every few seconds, adjusting the atmosphere between the two ships. Kilira stood still for a moment, watching the circular door in front of her as the Stormbreaker artificial intelligence completed the final environmental checks. Atmosphere compatible, the calm voice reported through the corridor speakers. Temperature within safe range. Docking bridge stabilized. The locking clamps shifted with a low metallic vibration that traveled through the floor beneath her boots. Beyond the airlock waited the human called Daniel Carter, the lone life sign drifting through the trade corridor only minutes earlier. Kilira studied the sealed hatch as if it were another battlefield threshold. Warriors of the Dominion rarely met strangers without preparation, and almost never without armor. Yet something about this encounter felt strangely simple compared to the conflicts she normally faced. A quiet chime sounded and the door began to open, its heavy metal segments sliding apart with the smooth precision of Dominion engineering. Cool air flowed through the corridor carrying a different scent now, something faintly industrial mixed with the trace of machine oil common aboard older cargo ships. On the opposite side of the docking bridge stood the human. Daniel Carter looked taller than she expected, perhaps 6 feet in height, with broad shoulders that suggested years of physical work rather than formal military training. His clothing was practical and worn from long travel, a dark utility jacket with grease marks along the sleeves and reinforced boots that had clearly seen many docking platforms. Light brown hair fell slightly across his forehead as he studied the alien cruiser interior with open curiosity. When his eyes finally settled on Kalira, he straightened instinctively. The difference between their species was immediately visible. Her blue iridescent skin reflected the corridor lighting like polished stone, and the silver lines of her armor plates framed her posture with quiet authority. For a brief moment neither of them spoke. The only sound came from the low hum of stormbreaker power conduits running beneath the deck plates. Daniel was the first to break the silence. "Well," he said with a small breath of relief, "I was hoping the ship that answered my signal would belong to someone friendly." His voice carried the relaxed tone she had heard over the transmission earlier, calm even while standing inside a warship built by one of the most disciplined civilizations in the sector. Kalira regarded him carefully before responding. "You are fortunate the Stormbreaker arrived first," she said. "Other travelers in this corridor might not have been so helpful." Daniel gave a thoughtful nod and glanced briefly back toward the open airlock leading into his cargo ship where dim yellow lights illuminated a narrow maintenance corridor. "Trust me, Captain, at the moment I am grateful for any ship that does not plan to leave me floating out here." He looked back at her again, studying the armored figure in front of him with honest curiosity rather than fear. "So you are the one who rescued me?" Kalira did not answer immediately. Instead she observed the subtle details that her warrior instincts always noticed first. His posture remained balanced even while standing on unfamiliar ground. His eyes moved across the cruiser interior with quiet awareness, measuring distances and exits the way experienced travelers often did. There was discipline in the way he carried himself. Not a soldier perhaps, but someone who had learned to survive difficult journeys. "Your engine cooling system failed," she said after a moment. "My engineers can repair it." Daniel exhaled slowly, the tension leaving his shoulders. "That is the best news I have heard in a long time." He paused, then added with a faint smile, "I suppose I should properly thank the captain who saved my ship." Kalira stepped forward slightly, the metal plates of her armor shifting with a soft mechanical sound. For reasons she could not yet explain, the council deadline echoed again in the back of her mind. 30 cycles to find a bond partner strong enough to stand beside her rank. And now, unexpectedly, the first stranger she encountered beyond Dominion space was a human mechanic drifting alone among the stars. The corridor lights reflected softly across the metal deck as Daniel Carter stepped fully onto the Stormbreaker cruiser, the subtle vibration beneath his boots reminding him that this was not a civilian freighter but a vessel designed for long campaigns and disciplined travel through deep space. The air felt slightly cooler than inside his cargo ship, carrying a clean mechanical scent, mixed with faint electrical warmth from the cruiser power systems. Daniel glanced around the corridor with open curiosity, taking in the smooth curved walls, the glowing navigation symbols etched into the metal panels, and the quiet hum of advanced technology running through every surface. His cargo vessel felt like a drifting toolbox compared to this place. Captain Kalira Voss watched him carefully as he looked around, her posture straight and calm while the silver plates of her armor reflected the corridor lighting in pale blue streaks. There was something oddly refreshing about the way the human reacted to his surroundings. Most visitors who encountered Dominion warships for the first time responded with cautious silence or visible tension. Daniel simply looked impressed. "I have to admit," he said after a moment, "your ship makes my cargo transport look like it belongs in a scrapyard." The remark carried a warm sense of humor rather than embarrassment. Kalira studied him with quiet interest before answering. "The Stormbreaker was built for endurance," she replied. "Dominion cruisers travel for months without returning to port." Daniel nodded slowly, running a hand along the edge of a nearby console panel as if admiring the engineering. "I can see that. My ship was never meant for luxury. Just long distances and stubborn engines." His eyes shifted back toward the open airlock where his damaged cargo vessel remained connected to the cruiser. Speaking of engines, I appreciate the help. That cooling unit was not planning to cooperate anytime soon. Kilira gestured down the corridor where several service drones quietly rolled past carrying tool modules and diagnostic equipment. My engineers have already begun stabilizing your reactor system, she said. Repairs should be completed within a few hours. Daniel exhaled slowly, relief crossing his face for the first time since their meeting. That is good news. I was starting to calculate how long a person could live on emergency rations while drifting between stars. Kilira regarded him thoughtfully. You sound remarkably calm for someone facing that possibility. Daniel gave a small shrug. When you spend enough time hauling cargo through the outer systems, you learn that worrying does not fix broken machines. Fixing broken machines does. His answer carried a quiet confidence that caught Kilira's attention again. This human mechanic spoke with the practical logic of someone who solved problems rather than complaining about them. The Stormbreaker artificial intelligence announced another status update through the corridor speakers. Cargo vessel Horizon Drift Reactor Cooling Unit currently under repair. Estimated completion time, 3 hours and 20 minutes. Daniel looked toward the ceiling where the voice originated and gave a small nod of appreciation. Your ship seems very organized. Kilira turned slightly, beginning to walk toward the main observation deck with the steady movement of a commander accustomed to others following her lead. Come, she said calmly. You should see where your ship is being repaired. Daniel hesitated only a moment before walking beside her through the corridor. As they moved through the cruiser interior, he noticed the disciplined rhythm of the ship environment. Crew members moved quietly between control stations. Holographic navigation charts glowed above circular consoles. Everything inside the Stormbreaker carried a sense of controlled purpose. When they reached the large observation window overlooking the docking bay, Daniel stopped in quiet amazement. Below them his cargo ship hung suspended in the docking clamps while several small engineering drones worked along the damaged engine assembly, beams of blue diagnostic light scanning the metal surface. From this angle the Horizon Drift looked even smaller than he remembered, a modest working vessel surrounded by the elegant structure of a Dominion warship. Daniel folded his arms loosely while watching the repair drones move across the engine housing. You know, he said thoughtfully, I have met many captains during my cargo runs. But none of them rescued a stranger with a ship like this. Kilira stood beside him, her gaze fixed on the drifting cargo vessel far below. For a moment she did not answer. Somewhere in the quiet space between them the council ultimatum echoed again in her thoughts. 30 cycles to find a bond partner worthy of her command. And now the first human she had ever met was standing beside her observation window watching repair drones fix his engine like it was just another day in the galaxy. The observation deck remained quiet except for the distant mechanical hum of repair drones working across the hull of the Horizon Drift far below the wide transparent window. Daniel Carter leaned lightly against the railing while watching the small machines glide over his cargo ship engine housing, their blue diagnostic beams moving slowly across the damaged cooling system like careful hands studying a complicated puzzle. The docking bay of the Stormbreaker cruiser stretched nearly half a mile across, a massive chamber of reinforced metal arches and glowing guide lights designed to support warships many times larger than his modest freighter. From this distance his ship looked almost fragile, a small traveler surrounded by the disciplined architecture of a Dominion vessel. Daniel exhaled slowly and shook his head with quiet amazement. I think my ship has never received this much professional attention in its entire career, he said with a faint smile. Captain Kilira Voss stood beside him with her hands resting calmly behind her back, her blue iridescent skin reflecting the pale lighting of the observation chamber while her gaze remained fixed on the repair operation below. Dominion engineers do not leave mechanical problems unfinished, she replied evenly. Daniel studied the drones again as they detached a damaged coolant conduit and replaced it with a new polished component from the Stormbreaker supply bay. I can see that, he said. Back home we usually fix things with whatever tools we can find and a good amount of stubborn determination. Kilira glanced toward him briefly, studying the calm expression on his face as he spoke. The human mechanic showed no sign of intimidation despite standing inside a military cruiser belonging to one of the most powerful fleets in the sector. Instead he seemed quietly fascinated by the engineering systems surrounding him. It reminded her of young cadets the first time they stepped aboard a command vessel, except Daniel carried himself with the steady confidence of someone who had already survived years among unpredictable stars. The Stormbreaker artificial intelligence interrupted the silence with another system update. Reactor cooling unit replacement in progress. Estimated completion time, 2 hours and 40 minutes. Daniel looked upward toward the ceiling where the voice echoed and gave an approving nod. Your ship is very efficient, he said. Kilira folded her arms slowly across her armor plates while considering the human beside her. Efficiency was one of the Dominion core principles, yet she found her thoughts drifting away from the engineering work and back toward the council chamber on Virel Prime. 30 cycles. The council had spoken the words with absolute certainty. Find a bond partner or surrender command. For a Dominion warrior the bond was more than tradition. It symbolized stability, shared instinct, and the ability to lead without imbalance. Kilira had never believed she required such a connection to maintain control of her fleet. Yet the council had made their judgment clear. Daniel shifted his posture slightly while continuing to watch the drones at work. You know, he said thoughtfully, if your engineers ever get tired of repairing warships, they would make excellent cargo mechanics. That cooling unit already looks better than when it left the factory. Kilira allowed the faintest hint of amusement to touch her expression. Dominion engineers are trained to maintain vessels that travel millions of miles through combat zones. A cargo freighter cooling system is not a difficult challenge for them. Daniel chuckled softly at that. Fair point. For a few moments neither of them spoke as the quiet work continued below. Outside the observation window the endless field of stars drifted slowly past the cruiser hull while distant trade ships moved like small sparks along the corridor routes. Kilira watched the human reflection in the glass beside her own reflection and noticed something unexpected. He did not behave like someone who had just been rescued from a dangerous situation. There was patience in his posture, calm curiosity in the way he studied the unfamiliar environment around him. Many warriors she had commanded did not possess such steady composure. Daniel finally broke the silence again. Captain, he said, turning slightly toward her, I hope you do not mind me saying this, but rescuing strangers in deep space seems like an unusual mission for a warship commander. Kilira did not answer immediately. Her gaze remained fixed on the distant stars for several seconds while the council ultimatum echoed again inside her thoughts like a slow drumbeat of fate. At last she looked back toward the human mechanic standing beside her. Sometimes, she said quietly, a commander discovers that the stars place unexpected travelers directly in her path. Daniel raised one eyebrow with mild curiosity, not yet understanding how literal that statement truly was. The stars outside the observation window drifted slowly across the vast darkness as the Stormbreaker cruiser maintained its quiet orbit along the trade corridor, and for a long moment Daniel Carter simply watched the distant lights of passing vessels while thinking about the unusual path that had brought him here. Only a few hours earlier he had been alone inside a failing cargo ship calculating how long his oxygen recyclers could keep working, and now he stood inside a warship belonging to a powerful alien civilization while repair drones carefully restored his engine system. The universe had a strange sense of timing. Captain Kilira Voss remained beside the observation window with the composed stillness of someone accustomed to command, her posture steady while the silver lines of her armor reflected the soft blue lighting of the chamber. Daniel finally turned his attention away from the docking bay below and looked toward her with thoughtful curiosity. You said something earlier that caught my attention, he said calmly. About travelers appearing in your path. Kilira did not respond immediately. Her gaze remained fixed on the distant horizon of stars beyond the cruiser hull while the quiet hum of the Stormbreaker power grid vibrated faintly through the floor beneath their feet. She had commanded fleets across hostile regions of space, negotiated ceasefires between rival clans, and navigated political tensions within the Dominion Council. Yet explaining the Council ultimatum to a human mechanic she had only just met felt unexpectedly difficult. After several seconds she finally spoke. "The Council of my people has given me a condition," she said evenly. Daniel folded his arms loosely while listening. "That sounds serious." Kilira nodded once. "Among the Virel Dominion, a warrior who commands fleets must eventually form a life bond with a compatible partner. It is believed that leadership requires balance between strength and connection." Daniel considered that quietly for a moment. "So your government believes every commander should have someone standing beside them?" "Yes," Kilira replied. "The bond symbolizes stability." Daniel looked back out toward the stars again as he processed the idea. "And I am guessing you have not chosen one yet." Kilira met his eyes with calm honesty. "No," Daniel gave a small thoughtful nod. "And they are not happy about that." Kilira allowed a faint breath of acknowledgement. "They have given me 30 cycles to resolve the matter or surrender my command." Daniel blinked once as the weight of that statement settled in. "That is a serious deadline." "Yes," she said quietly. For a few moments neither of them spoke while the soft glow of the docking bay illuminated the horizon drift below them. Daniel finally rubbed the back of his neck and gave a small half-amused exhale. "You know, Captain, when I woke up this morning I expected to spend the day repairing an overheating engine and delivering cargo crates to a mining colony." He glanced at her again with a bemused expression. "I did not expect to hear about interstellar leadership traditions." Kilira studied him carefully, noticing how easily he accepted information that might have unsettled other travelers. Humans were known for adaptability, but experiencing it firsthand felt different. Daniel tilted his head slightly. "So your council believes a bonded partner proves you are stable enough to command?" Kilira nodded once more. "Correct." Daniel gave a quiet whistle under his breath while looking out across the massive docking bay. "That is quite a policy." Then he glanced sideways toward her again with a curious expression that held no judgment, only interest. "And I take it finding the right partner among your own people is not simple." Kilira allowed the smallest pause before answering. "Political rivalries make the situation complicated." Daniel chuckled softly. "Politics always makes things complicated." He rested his arms lightly on the observation railing again while watching the repair drones move across his cargo ship engine housing. For a moment he seemed to be considering something before finally speaking again in a casual tone. "Well, Captain, if you ever need advice from someone who has spent years solving mechanical problems, I can offer one simple rule." Kilira raised one eyebrow slightly. "And what rule is that?" Daniel smiled faintly while nodding toward the drones repairing his engine below. "Sometimes the easiest solution is the one you did not expect when the day began." Kilira looked down at the small cargo vessel suspended inside her warship docking bay, then slowly returned her gaze to the calm human mechanic standing beside her, and for the first time since the council ultimatum had been delivered she felt the quiet possibility that the stars might already have begun answering the question she had not yet dared to ask. The observation deck grew quiet again after Daniel Carter's words settled into the still air of the Stormbreaker cruiser, and Captain Kilira Voss remained motionless beside the wide glass window while distant stars moved slowly across the dark horizon beyond the ship hull. Far below them inside the docking bay the repair drones continued their careful work along the horizon drift engine housing, thin lines of diagnostic light sliding across the metal as the cooling system replacement neared completion. For several long seconds Kilira did not respond to the human suggestion, yet her mind returned again and again to the same unexpected thought. Sometimes the simplest solution appears when the day begins in chaos. Dominion warriors were trained to analyze strategy through complex tactical frameworks, but Daniel had spoken with the quiet confidence of someone who solved problems by looking directly at the machinery in front of him. Kilira slowly folded her arms across the front plates of her armor while studying the reflection of both of them in the observation glass. The difference between them was striking. She was a commander raised within strict traditions older than many star systems, and he was a traveler who spent his days repairing engines and delivering cargo across unpredictable frontier routes. Yet the human beside her carried a calm steadiness she recognized immediately. Daniel finally shifted slightly against the railing and glanced back toward her when he noticed her silence stretching longer than expected. "I hope that did not sound too strange," he said with a small thoughtful smile. "Engineers tend to see the universe in terms of simple fixes." Kilira shook her head gently. "Your perspective is practical." Daniel chuckled quietly at that description. "That is one way to say it." The Stormbreaker artificial intelligence interrupted again with another system report. "Cargo vessel Horizon Drift Reactor Cooling Unit Replacement complete. Final diagnostics underway. Estimated operational status in 12 minutes. Daniel looked down into the docking bay with clear relief crossing his expression. The engine housing that had earlier been dark and damaged now glowed with a steady blue stabilization field as the final drone secured the outer panel into place. "Your crew works fast," he said with genuine appreciation. Kilira watched the completed repairs as well, but her thoughts moved somewhere else entirely. 30 cycles. The Council ultimatum had seemed like a looming storm when she left Virel Prime. Yet now she stood here with a human mechanic who had calmly faced the possibility of drifting alone through empty space without panic or complaint. Strength did not always appear in armor or battle records. Sometimes it appeared in quiet patience. Daniel leaned slightly closer to the observation glass and studied the finished engine assembly below. "Looks like I will be able to continue my delivery run after all," he said. Then he glanced back at her again, curiosity returning to his voice. "Although I still feel like I owe the captain of this ship a proper thank you." Kilira turned toward him fully for the first time since their conversation began. The blue glow of the docking bay lights reflected softly across her iridescent skin while the silver plates of her armor shifted slightly as she moved. "You have already expressed gratitude," she replied evenly. Daniel smiled faintly. "Where I come from, rescuing someone from a drifting ship earns more than a polite sentence." He paused for a moment before continuing with his usual calm honesty. "Besides, I have the feeling this was not the only reason you decided to stop your cruiser for a damaged cargo vessel." Kilira studied him with quiet intensity. Humans were often described as perceptive, but she had not expected him to notice that detail so quickly. The artificial intelligence spoke again from the ceiling speakers. "Cargo vessel Horizon Drift engines fully operational. Docking clamps ready for release." Daniel nodded in satisfaction and looked back toward the docking bay where his ship waited. "Well, Captain, it seems your engineers have saved my day." He turned slightly toward her, unaware that the next words she spoke would change the direction of both their journeys. Kilira allowed one slow breath before answering, her voice calm but carrying the weight of a decision forming quietly in her mind. "Perhaps," she said, "your arrival has solved more than one problem tonight." Daniel blinked once, clearly curious about what she meant, while the endless field of stars continued drifting silently beyond the Stormbreaker hull as if the galaxy itself were waiting to see what choice she would make next. Daniel Carter stood quietly beside the wide observation window while the Stormbreaker docking clamps slowly disengaged from the hull of the Horizon Drift below, the massive mechanical arms retracting with smooth precision as soft guidance lights illuminated the cargo vessel like a runway across the dark bay. The repaired engine assembly now glowed with steady blue stability, a calm pulse that signaled the ship was ready to return to the endless routes between distant systems. For several seconds Daniel simply watched his freighter drifting free again, a small familiar machine in a place that had felt impossibly large only hours earlier. He exhaled slowly with quiet satisfaction. "That looks better than when I left Earth," he said with a faint smile. Captain Kilira Voss stood a few steps behind him, her posture straight and composed while the final docking indicators dimmed across the observation deck consoles. The decision forming in her thoughts had not arrived with sudden excitement or dramatic revelation. Instead it had grown slowly during their conversation like the steady alignment of stars that eventually revealed a clear navigation path. Dominion warriors were trained to trust instinct when logic alone could not solve a problem. And for the first time since leaving Virel Prime she felt that instinct settling into place with quiet certainty. Daniel finally turned away from the window and brushed his hands lightly across the front of his jacket as if preparing to return to his ship. "Well, Captain," he said warmly, "I should probably get back over there and make sure the rest of my systems did not decide to take the day off as well." Kilira stepped forward before he could move toward the corridor. The silver plates of her armor shifted softly as she stopped beside him, and for a brief moment Daniel noticed that her expression had changed slightly. The calm authority remained, but there was also a quiet seriousness behind her gaze now. "Daniel Carter," she said evenly. Daniel paused and looked back at her with mild curiosity. "Yes, Captain." Kilira held his eyes for several seconds before continuing. "Earlier you said that engineers solve problems by examining the simplest solution in front of them." Daniel nodded once with an amused shrug. "That is usually the rule." Kilira allowed a slow breath before speaking the words that had formed in her mind since the moment she heard his voice across the damaged cargo transmission. "The council of my people requires that I present a bonded partner within 30 cycles." Daniel blinked once as the topic returned. "Right, the leadership tradition." Kilira inclined her head slightly. "Yes." Then she continued with calm clarity. "The bond does not require romantic affection or elaborate ceremony. It requires mutual agreement between two individuals who choose to stand beside one another with trust and respect." Daniel studied her expression carefully now, realizing that this conversation had moved into unfamiliar territory. "I see," he said slowly. Kilira gestured quietly toward the observation window where the horizon drift waited only a few hundred feet away, its engines glowing softly in the docking bay darkness. "You are a traveler who survives alone among distant systems. You remain calm under uncertainty. And you speak with honesty rather than fear." Daniel raised one eyebrow slightly as he began to understand what she was suggesting. Kilira finished her explanation with the same steady tone she used when issuing fleet commands. "If you agree, Daniel Carter, you could return with me to Virel Prime and stand beside me before the council as my chosen bond partner." Silence filled the observation chamber for several seconds while the distant hum of Stormbreaker systems echoed softly through the walls. Daniel looked back at his repaired cargo ship, then out toward the endless field of stars stretching across the galaxy beyond the cruiser hull. When he finally spoke his voice carried the thoughtful calm that had defined him since the moment she first heard his signal. "You know, Captain," he said slowly, "when I left my last delivery station this morning I expected the most complicated decision of the day to involve a broken coolant valve." He looked back at her again with a small smile that carried equal parts disbelief and curiosity. "Now an alien fleet commander is asking me to help save her career." Kilira waited patiently for his answer without pressing him further. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck for a moment before finally letting out a quiet breath and giving a thoughtful nod toward the vast starfield outside the window. "Well," he said with calm acceptance, "I suppose sometimes the universe offers a new job when you least expect it." The stars continued drifting silently across the darkness beyond the Stormbreaker cruiser, and for the first time since the council ultimatum had been spoken Kilira Voss felt the